Hello everyone, my name is Liron and welcome to our HRD live podcast. We'll be discussing a wide range of topics throughout the following weeks that will range from people leadership to your human capital. Throughout the following weeks, we'll be hosting a number of influential business leaders to hear their experience and tips. And today we're delighted to welcome Stephen Pearce from Hitachi Europe. Welcome,
Hi.
Hitachi.
Nice to be here.
Cool. So for this episode, we'll be focusing on envisioning the future workforce. So to start off with, Stephen, would it be cool to ask you an interesting fact about yourself?
Okay. Something not too embarrassing, perhaps.
Oh,
Something interesting. I was once live on Sky TV in the World Conker Championships. Is a slightly unusual fact. There was a pub, probably still is, in Northamptonshire that ran the World Conker Championships every year. And one year it was featured on Sky TV. So that's a very small claim to fame. And I wasn't very successful, but it was certainly a little bit different.
I can imagine it was quite a fun day then.
It was a fun day.
Okay,
absolutely.
That's good then. That's good to hear. So I guess it would be great to start off just to hear about your two roles and your responsibilities at Hitachi Europe.
Great. Yeah, sure. So I wear a number of different hats at Hitachi Europe. So Hitachi is a huge global Japanese company. Everybody knows about Hitachi TVs or Hitachi sort of consumer goods, but actually it's a massive global corporation in sectors as diverse as trains and power, financial services, consulting, IoT, and artificial intelligence. So it's a hugely diverse company, and my roles are mainly twofold. One is I'm the Deputy Managing Director of Hitachi Europe, which I've been doing for about a year and a half, and the other role is the Chief HR Officer. So I actually combine the people, if you like, the people part of it with a broader general management responsibility within the business, and I interact with pretty much every part of Hitachi across Europe, where we've got about 12,000 people, something like that, in this diverse range of businesses across a whole range of people and business-related issues. Areas like mergers and acquisitions. We're a company that's always changing. And despite having been around for 100 or so years from a very strong foundation in Japan, we're continually changing our businesses. So I get involved in the change management and mergers and acquisition, developing and supporting the global strategy in Europe and helping us to succeed really in this region.
Cool. So you touched on that briefly, but could you maybe touch upon the unique attributes of Hitachi Europe?
Yeah, because Hitachi has this strong Japanese foundation, it has very strong values that go with that, which I think is quite typical with a lot of big Japanese companies. So we have values which in the English version at least are harmony, sincerity, and pioneering spirit. Pioneering spirit maybe is quite obvious in a sense. That's about being innovative, about change. Harmony and sincerity, harder to translate, but they're around working together as a team, taking accountability, ensuring integrity is actually part of everything we do. And the people that work in Hitachi take those things very seriously. They're very important for them because we will always be compliant. We'll always do things the right way. But actually, we can then use that as a foundation for actually developing our extraordinary businesses, really. But the people that work in Hitachi tend to take those things really seriously. And somebody said to me once when I joined Hitachi, which was around 10 years ago, I went on a program, an executive development program in Japan. And we were talking with one of the board directors of the company, a very senior guy. And he was talking about what we might do differently in the future and so on. And being new to the company, I spotted lots of things. I thought, why don't we do this differently, that differently? We can make more profit here or whatever, drive more revenues there. And he said, yeah, sure, Steve, that I can see all those things, but actually it isn't just about money. And that really struck me, of course, because to be a company which is going to be around for a very long time and be very successful and attract people, you've got to think about more than just money. And of course, we do. But I think that's part of what differentiates Hitachi people. Another difference I've really seen in a Japanese company. Before I worked in American companies, I worked in a British company, all of which have their strengths and weaknesses, good, bad things as every company does. But one differentiator, I think, more in the Japanese company is the need for emotional intelligence, because people won't always say what they're thinking. in an American company, there's much more openness, and people just kind of are much more direct in their approach, perhaps. I don't want to generalize completely, but you know what I mean. And in a Japanese company, that isn't so obvious. So you need people who succeed in Hitachi typically have the emotional intelligence to work out what's going on, even if nothing is said. And the people that, if you kind of flip that over and say, actually, the people that fail, people have had to manage out the business or deal with in different ways, have been those where they've come in and they just haven't got that sensitivity about what's going on. But that ability, that emotional intelligence, also tends to mean people are good at relationship building. They're good at influencing and building alliances with others to kind of work collectively through collaboration and co-creation, as we call it. And so I think that strength differentiates what we do. One of our current part of our current strategy, a strap line says the future is open to suggestion. And that means, it doesn't mean it's our idea. It's mean we want to collaborate with others. We want to hear what other people need to say. We need to understand, what does society need for the future, and that's where that ability to be open to others, to listen, to understand, and to work collaboratively is really important.
Mm-hmm. And that leads on nicely to my next question, which is, what do you think are the biggest implications of HR at the moment?
I think HR has evolved over the years. I've worked in HR for about 30 years. So I left university and worked in HR as a graduate trainee a long time ago. And I've seen it evolve through that period of time. But I think one constant theme is, how does HR add value? How is it really seen to be a value add to the organisation? Because if it's not, why would anybody invest in it? And I think there's part of it which is almost the intuitive thing that says, you've got to develop your people. You've got to invest in your people. Now there's the old quote that says, well, what if you invest in your people and they leave? And of course the answer is, well, what if you don't invest in your people and they don't leave? You end up with a problem. So there's always that intuitive part. But more generally, I think HR needs to demonstrate a real commercial focus, a real understanding of the business. And one of the missions I've had, and I've written a few articles about it, which is about how can HR ensure that it speaks the business language. And one of the frustrations I have with HR, and why I think it's a really important continuing focus for us as a function, is how do we ensure that HR staff are numerate, that can speak the language of the business, so that when we interact with business leaders, we go in and we talk about the business in their language. We understand the P&L, we understand the customers, we understand the business pressures and the issues they're facing in commercial financial terms, rather than just go and talk about HR jargon. So we start where they are rather than where we'd like to be, and of course then work through with those issues. How can HR help solve their issues? How can we use the processes and the expertise that we have, the systems we have, to solve their issues and help build a stronger business? So I think that's a really key area for HR right now, and has been for a long time. I think another area where we need to be adding value, which is a challenge to us, which is around the whole area of HR analytics and how we can use data to add value. Typically, organisations have lots of data, and HR is no different. But how do we actually capture people data? How do we actually work out what's important, and then do something with it, so that the organisation recognises that we're not just there to do keep them clean from a people point of view and do the basics, but actually can be really adding value, as any business function would do in terms of using information, using data. And I think it's a tough journey that we're on to do that, because with all this data, where do you start and what can you do with it, and how do you ensure that the data that you have isn't just looking backwards? Well, we can tell you what happened, tell you how many people left in the last year, but the question is who will leave, or how many people will leave in the next year. And then what can you do differently to help ensure that your organisation manages that and maybe and improves that situation, as an example. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, that's another burning platform for us in HR right now, looking forward.
Cool. So yeah, another big aspect of HR is learning and development. So how do you think that leaders can adopt and foster intergenerational learning within their businesses?
Yeah, this whole intergenerational thing, I think, is a really interesting trend right now, because I guess for a number of reasons, really, and I think it's mainly driven by the fact that people are working for longer. And I was kind of reflecting on that. Why is it? What's really changing? And I think there are probably three main reasons. One is we're all living longer. I mean, obviously, statistically, that's great, but it means that people want to work for longer, typically, as part of that. And one of the drivers for that, of course, is the end of the defined benefit pension plan. When you have a nice pension pot, so why wouldn't you want to retire and enjoy the fruits of your labour? So as we moved away from that to defined contribution plans, then people have to have less money to spend than they had before. Therefore, they have to work longer in order to be able to retire. So I think as people live longer, as pensions aren't there, and actually people are healthier into older age now. So it means that we stretch our workforce, and then, as you say, we have kind of this multi-generational approach. And typically, we've often had a couple of generations in the workplace, but we're going to have more in the future. And we're already seeing 3 and eventually maybe 4. Maybe they exist in some places right now of generations working together. And you use the word learning, and I think that's really the key to all of this. It's to say, how do you make it successful? Well, the question is, how do we learn from each other? How do we ensure that we don't see actually that means a divide across our workforce? How do we see it as actually a way to learn from each other and use the richness of the wisdom and the experience of one generation with the freshness and the challenge and the willingness to disrupt and to use digital innovation of another generation? And how do you combine those two things to ensure that you get the best for both? And I love something areas like reverse mentoring, because traditionally the mentors have been those that have been around for a long time mentoring the young, but actually having the younger generations mentoring the older generations to say, well, why aren't you using digital? Why aren't you using the same technologies that you use in your personal life, in your work life? You know, we all know that typically outside work, people will be on Facebook and they'll be using their phones and all the time. I heard the other day people check their phones 300 times a day on average. I mean, it's just part of life. But we go to work and we use old technologies typically to communicate. We use old systems, and that's partly because we haven't perhaps got the investment that we need to invest in the change that you could get in your phone. You can replace your phone much more easily than you can replace a huge system in a company, of course. But I think there's also a mindset there that says almost we leave that behind when we go to work. We leave digital behind and we go back to our old practices and old approaches. If I talk to my kids about sending emails, they kind of laugh at me because they communicate through social media. And so that's the generational difference where we need to learn from each other. And I think the big challenge to all of us, actually, whatever age we are, which will differentiate everybody in the workplace in the future, is the ability to change and to learn whatever age we are, and not to hang on to, well, we used to do it that way, so therefore it must be right. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. And it's that openness to change and openness to difference, I think, will equip us in whatever we're doing, in whatever role, in whatever organisation, to be able to be employable for the future. And it is this lifelong learning, this employability thing we've talked about in HR for, well, at least 30 years, because that's how long I've been doing it. And it's, in a sense, it's more important than ever, because the rate of change, we all know, is increasing all the time. The breadth of change and the technology, is extraordinary. We have to grasp that, and we can't not do so, because ultimately, I think, from a multi-generational point of view, much more unites us than divides us. Actually, people want to be treated the right way. They want to be respected. They want to have a voice in the workplace. They want to have a clear purpose. They want to make sure they get the right balance between personal life and work life and so on. And a lot is made of Generation Z and Generation X and baby boomers and all the differences, but actually fundamentally we're people, right? We're people and we have the same needs. And if we treat people the right way, my belief is that unites us much more than any of those other differences of when we were born divide us. And all of us then have the challenge within that of saying, okay, how can we keep changing? How can we keep learning?
Yes, definitely a change, but a positive change and positive challenge looking forward to the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So you touched upon digital technologies. That'd be perfect to talk about maybe artificial intelligence. Do you feel like that's a positive impact that we're going to see in the next few years, or do you see it as sort of another challenge or a negative to some businesses?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, because many organisations are challenged and are kind of grappling with that issue. What does AI mean for us? What does it mean for us as society is, of course, the bigger question. I think there's no doubt that it is a trend which is we can't change it, we can't stop it. It's happening, and my view. I mean, you read some people and you read some reports that talk about 47% of roles are going to be transformed by artificial intelligence, or potentially a number of those will be lost over future years, according to the Oxford Martin report of a few years ago. And some people look at the almost the disaster scenario coming from all of that. I actually take a quite different view, and a more positive view, which says that artificial intelligence isn't so much about replacing, it's augmenting the roles that we have. Now, the roles will change. What people do will change, and the way we do it will change. But actually, I think it is that augmentation. So I think there's some great examples out there which we've seen developing, and whilst it is a developing science. And I heard about one the other day where an artificial intelligence was used to look at contracts, so legal contracts, to look for loopholes. And at the same time, the same pile of contracts was given to a group of lawyers to look at, to spot loopholes in the contract. The lawyers spotted 85% of them. The artificial intelligence spotted 92% of them. The lawyers took 90 minutes per contract. The artificial intelligence took 22 seconds per contract. So why wouldn't you want that technology in the legal field, as an example, to augment the people that you have? Another example, I think, is in the medical field. I heard where artificial intelligence is used, or has been used, I think it was IBM's Watson, to look at cancer scans, or look at scans to look for cancers in patients. And again, the artificial intelligence was better at it than doctors. The doctors weren't bad, but they didn't spot as many as the artificial intelligence. So then why wouldn't you want to embrace that? It doesn't replace the doctor, but it augments, it enhances the performance of the people. And I think you can look at other areas where that will be the case. So we can't stop it. There's no question it's going to happen. But, you read about it all the time in games, in chess or whatever. Artificial intelligence is now beating the best chess players in the world. So it makes us better at what we do if we use it in the right way. So my view is a positive one, really, of artificial intelligence. Hitachi has a really interesting example of using artificial intelligence. It's been piloted in Japan, where, as you can imagine, a company like Hitachi has a massive research and development facility. A lot of it's focusing on digital and artificial intelligence because it is about the future. And they've developed what they call the happiness meter, and it's like a pass that we wear around our necks at work. Many of us do, on a lanyard or whatever. But it monitors the way we move, the way that we interact with other people. It monitors how we spend our time at work. Using an algorithm, it then gives advice at the end of the day to each person on their phone about kind of how they might use the way they work to be more effective, to move around more, to interact more, to behave in different ways. And what they've shown, piloting it in different organizations in Japan, is that if you look at the way that the staff interact, if you get the feedback and you act on it and improve your happiness. I mean, it's more about satisfaction and well-being than just simply happiness. But if you get a higher score by doing the right things, you actually improve productivity. They used it in a call center as an example, where they They got significantly greater productivity. Really clever, really interesting. Okay, so that challenges, again, the way we work. So that's just one example, I think, a very small example. And I'm not suggesting we're all going to wear happiness monitors. Maybe we should. Maybe we'll all be much happier and more effective at work. But I think it's a really interesting technology, and we're just at the beginning of seeing artificial intelligence grow and develop. So ultimately, I think, though, that the challenge comes back to the same one we talked about for the intergenerational workforces, which is that those that will be successful are those that can embrace it and understand the benefit of it and integrate it into their role, which means the need to change. Now, wasn't it Darwin who's supposed to have said something along the lines of the most successful species aren't the strongest, it's those who are best at changing, and our workforces, our staff need to be in that position, and we need to help them be in that position too, to recognise the need to change the way we do our roles, to change the way we interact with other people using the technologies, and to embrace it rather than resist it. And I think the opportunity for us as organisations is huge. And ultimately, yes, some roles will go, but there'll be some new roles too. I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago we'd have a role of an app designer or a social media consultant? Let's just get two simple examples, really, but there'll be a mass of others, of new roles. As every industrial revolution has lost roles and gained roles, it'll be just the same, I think, in the future. So I take a very positive view of artificial intelligence, and I'm really excited to see what it's going to bring, actually, as we move forward.
Great, cool. And would that change be something that you'd give to advice to business leaders to just adapt to the change and adopt that sort of change to technologies?
Yeah, and I think that business leaders, those that have responsibility across wide areas in our organisation, have to be the role models, really, for this as well. Now, clearly they would see the benefits of it, but it's about role modelling, and I think it's the same for HR too. Actually, we need to be role models for these things. If we talk about the need to change, the challenge for each of us is how are we changing? What are we doing differently, so that we're role models in our organisation? And I think very often business leaders and HR leaders, I include as part of that, tend to be perhaps of generations where they're not so comfortable with some of the artificial intelligence, with the drive towards more digital businesses, and they have to embrace it. They have to role model it, and we have to in HR, because we cannot say to other people, this is coming and you need to embrace it, and not do so ourselves and be role models. So as an example, I've tried to do that. So we in Hitachi, we're rolling out Workday as our HR system, fantastically rich system bringing data and information. And typically I'd have got lots of other people to do lots of things on that system for me. And I'm trying to do more myself, to actually use it myself, to recognise that I've got to embrace it, I've got to use it, I've got to role model it in order to really understand it and help to leverage the value from it and make sure that I keep changing, like I keep telling everybody else.
So exciting times, I think.
Indeed it is.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Stephen, on HRD Live podcast. Great stuff. Please remember to tune in on iTunes, Spotify and SoundCloud, and then follow us on social media.